What's up guys, this is Eric Vasquez here with a brand new tutorial for you today from designcuts.com. In this tutorial we'll be creating a nature-themed wellness flyer design in Photoshop. To do this we'll be using some beautiful textures and design elements courtesy of artists Eclectic, Anthology, and Veris Studio from the Creators Inspiring Artistic Collection. This all-new bundle includes a truly massive assortment of ready-to-work-with brushes, textures, watercolors, map creators, and more. In addition to these elements, we will also be using a small handful of free stock photos, a free typeface, and a flyer mockup to bring it all together. So, if you're all ready to get started and venture into the wild, then fire up Photoshop and let's get started. Now, over here in Photoshop, the first thing we want to do is set up our new document. So let's make this document 5 inches wide by 7 inches tall, which is sort of a standard flyer size. We'll set the resolution to 300, color mode to RGB, and then let's just go ahead and give our file a name. Here I will call this Wellness in the Wild Flyer Design, and then go ahead and click Create from the bottom right corner. Now we should just have a single background layer in here that's locked, and to get started let's go up to the File menu and choose Place Embedded so we can begin by bringing in our first freebie. Okay, so here I'm going to come into the freebies folder and then choose Eclectic Anthology, Paper 10, and this is just one of many beautiful paper textures that you guys will find in the full bundle. And then let's just go ahead and choose Place to bring it into Photoshop. Now hold the Control key and click on the image and choose Rotate 90 degrees clockwise so that we can change the orientation to be vertical. Now click and hold the Alt, Option, and Shift keys and drag outwards from any of the 4 corners of the bounding box. Now I should point out also that in newer versions of Photoshop, you no longer have to hold the Shift key to do this. It will automatically constrain the proportions just by dragging. So in that case, if you are in a newer version of Photoshop, you only need to hold the Alt Option key as you drag outwards. Now after doing this, we can just go ahead and trash that background layer. We no longer need it. And then we'll come down to the adjustment layer icon and choose black and white to add a black and white adjustment layer and desaturate this paper texture. Now come back up to the File menu again, choose Place Embedded, and now we'll go ahead and bring in our next texture here from Veris Studio. Okay, and to get started here, let's go ahead and bring in background 3 and then choose Place. Okay, and for this, we're going to want to go ahead and scale it up quite a bit. So again, just click and drag outwards to scale this up, and let's position it somewhere around here. All right, maybe make it a little bit larger. Somewhere around there looks pretty good, and then press Enter to apply the changes. Now once again, come up to File, Place Embedded, and now let's bring in Texture 12. Okay, so we'll bring this texture in, and this one we're going to scale up quite a bit as well. Alright, so I'm going to zoom out here, hold the Alt Option key and just drag outwards, and then I'm going to rotate it counterclockwise a bit, and maybe move it up here somewhere in the corner. Somewhere around there looks pretty good, and then just press Enter or Return to apply the changes. Alright, so now that we have both of these textures here from Veris Studio and one from Eclectic Anthology, let's go ahead and just put these into a couple of folders. So I'll select those bottom 2 layers, call this one Eclectic Anthology Texture, and then do the same for these two. We're going to grab both of those while holding the Shift key, press Command Control and G on the keyboard, and we'll call this one Veris Studio Textures. And then let's go ahead and change the blending mode of this folder to Soft Light. Come back up to the File menu, choose Place Embedded, and now we're going to navigate to our first free stock photo. Now your folders may look a little bit different than mine. I just have everything that I'm using here that is not part of the bundle in a separate resources folder. Now I should mention that this folder will not be something that you guys have access to. You will have to download these stock photos, the mockup, and the font separately. But there are links to all of these elements in the written portion of the tutorial, so please go ahead and check that out. Save these things so you guys can follow along. Now, once you have saved these, the first one that we're going to open here is this kind of nice marble background. So let's go ahead and choose Place to bring that into Photoshop. And again, hold Alt, Option, and Shift just to drag this out, make it nice and large, and then press Enter or Return to apply the changes. And then go ahead and change the blending mode from normal to overlay. Alright, so we now have this kind of nice blending happening with all of our textures. From here, come down to the adjustment layer icon, add a solid color adjustment layer, and for the hex value, let's enter D1E3D9 okay, which is this light bluish green color, and then go ahead and click OK. And then we're going to change the blending mode here to linear burn. Now I'm going to duplicate this adjustment layer by pressing Command Control J. Double click on the color swatch here so that we can change the value of this to A0A EA0. And then go ahead and click OK once again. And now for this layer, let's change the blending mode to subtract. So it's going to make it much darker. Come back down to the adjustment layer icon, add a HueSaturation adjustment layer. We're going to, over here in the properties, check off the colorize box, leave the saturation set to 25, and move the hue slider to around 186 or 87. Alright, so we now have this nice kind of bluish gray background happening here. Alright, now at this point we can select that top hue saturation adjustment layer, hold the shift key and select your very bottom Eclectic Anthology texture folder, and press Command Control G to put all of these into a new folder. Double click the group 1 text and simply call it background. So we have now set up the background for our flyer. Now let's come back up to the File menu, choose Place Embedded, and we're going to go back to our freebies here and into the Veris Studio subfolder. And this time let's go ahead and open up frame1.png. Now there's a lot of these cool glittery, marble geometric frames in this bundle from Veris Studio, along with some different letters and characters that you guys can have some fun with. But for now we're just going to be using this one element here, just for the purposes of this tutorial. So here all I'm doing is just dropping it in and scaling it up a bit, and you can see that the color scheme we have here sort of matches what we have in our background. So once we've placed this frame in here, let's go back up to File, and this time choose Open, so we can now open our next stock photo. So again, I'll be coming into the Resources folder and grabbing my stock photos from here, but I encourage you guys to save all of these stock photos into one central location, just to help keep things simple and organized. So again, you'll find a link for all of these resources in the written portion of the tutorial, so please refer to that to download these and follow along. Alright, so we're just going to choose Open here to open our plant. And the nice thing about this image is that there is a good amount of contrast between the plant itself and the background. However, there's a lot of these smaller shapes in here in between some of the areas of the plant that would be a little bit tedious and time-consuming to isolate with either the brush or the pen tool. So what we're going to do instead is use a technique that I like to use, which involves the color range option. So go to the select menu and then choose color range. And what you can do here is select this middle eyedropper that has the plus icon next to it and just begin clicking on some colors in the background. Now as I do that, you can see that it's adding to our selection and slowly turning everything in the background white. Alright, so maybe continue to add some of these colors, pick a few colors from the bottom here, and just continue to add. And what's nice about this is that as long as you're not selecting anything in this greenish yellow range, you'll get some nice separation here. So after that, go ahead and click OK, and you'll see that you now have a pretty nice looking selection. Now there is a small dot here and a small dot there that we can get just by pressing L on the keyboard to change to our Lasso Tool. Hold the Shift key, and then just manually come in here and click and drag around any of those little specks that we might have missed. Okay, so from here, come up to the Select menu, choose Inverse, come back up to Select, choose Modify, Contract, and we're going to contract this by about 3 pixels, and then go ahead and click on the Add Layer Mask icon. So we've now removed the background and brought the selection in by about 3 pixels. So from here, hold the Control key and click on the layer, choose Convert to Smart Object, double-click the Layer 0 text, and just rename this layer Plants. Alright, so now I'm going to just move this tab to the side, click and drag my plants over here into the main document, press Command Control and the tilde key to pan over to the other tab, press Command Control W to close it, and choose Don't Save. Now for the plants, I want to position it below the frame layer, and then press Command Control T to do a free transform, and we're just going to move this down and sort of figure out where we want to position these things here in our design. Alright, so I'm just going to be kind of moving this around a little bit, trying to get a sense of the size and positioning here that we want. Alright, maybe I'll scale it up just a little bit more. Alright, somewhere around there looks pretty good. Maybe I'll tap it up a bit. Okay, and then maybe it doesn't have to be quite so large. I'm just going to scale it back down a little bit more, slide it over, and position it here. Alright, so you now have your plants resting behind the frame. Now hold the Alt Option key and click on the adjustment layer icon, and then come down here and choose the black and white adjustment layer. Check off the box that says use previous layer to create a clipping mask and click OK. And now you can see that our black and white adjustment layer is only affecting the plants. So while you have that adjustment layer selected, press the number 5 to reduce the opacity to 50%. Now select the plants Smart Object layer again, return to the adjustment layer icon, and this time add a HueSaturation adjustment layer. Now over here in the Properties panel, we're going to check off the Colorize box, leave the saturation set to 25, and change the hue to about 157 or so. Right, somewhere about there, and that looks pretty good. Now we're going to select the Plant Smart Object, hold Shift and select the Black and White 2 adjustment layer, press Command-Control-G to put these 3 layers into a folder, double-click the Group 1 text and call it Plants. Now we'll also do the same for the frame, just by selecting that layer, pressing Command-Control-G to add it into a folder, double-click the Group 1 text and rename this folder Frame. Now what we're going to do from here is just make this a little bit bigger so that we can see what we're doing here. We can move the properties to the side for the moment. And I'm going to select the frame folder and press the number 4 or 5 on the keyboard just to lower the opacity. Let's go to maybe 30%. So press the number 3 just to drop the opacity down there. And then we're going to add a layer mask here so that we can see what we're doing. Alright, now I'm just going to zoom in and use the spacebar to switch to the hand so that I can kind of move around here a little bit easier. And what we're looking to do here is come into the Plants folder, hold the Command-Control key, and click on the Plants layer thumbnail icon, or the Smart Object thumbnail, as you can see it's called here. Now, make sure that you still have the actual layer mask attached to the Frame folder selected, and then you can just collapse that Plants folder, press B on the keyboard to get your brush tool, and then go ahead and make the brush a bit larger using the right bracket on the keyboard. Now we want to make sure that we have a pretty hard edge brush here, so hold the Shift key and tap the right bracket until you have a hard edge brush, which you can see up here in the top of the toolbar. Now make sure that you have a black foreground color selected, which we do, and leave your brush set to 100% opacity. Now all we're going to do is begin brushing over some of the edges of the plants here where we want it to come in front of the frame. So essentially we're just hiding parts of the frame here where we want to reveal some of these leaves and foliage coming in front. Alright, so it can be a little bit tricky here, for example, where you have a stem sort of intersecting. So just go slow, take your time, and try to brush carefully. I'm just using a mouse to do this, but it may be a little bit easier if you guys have a tablet. But if not, you know, it's not that hard to just kind of freehand it. And of course, if you mess anything up, you can just change your foreground color to white and brush that area back in. Alright, so all we're doing here, you can see I'm just going over a few areas pretty quickly just to mask that out. Alright, and then I think that's looking pretty good. So once you're happy with the selection and the way things are looking, go ahead and press Command-Control-D on the keyboard to deselect all, press V to switch to the Move tool, and then press 0 to bring this up to 100% opacity. And now you can see what we've done here. So now that we have this selection with our mask, let's hold the Command-Control key and click on the layer mask. Now we're going to add a new layer just above it, and we're going to then choose Select from the top, Inverse, and then click on your foreground color over here, and let's change it to 223134, which is this nice sort of dark blue color. Then go ahead and click OK. And now that that is our foreground color, we simply need to press Alt, Option, and Delete to fill our selection with that color. Now once again, press Command-Control-D to deselect, and then we're just going to name this layer Plant Shadow. Alright, so from here, come up to the Filter menu, choose Blur, Gaussian Blur, and let's apply a blur of around 7.5 or 7.6 pixels, and then press Return to apply the changes. From here, we're going to change the blend mode from normal to multiply, and then we're going to, once again, hold the Command-Control key and click on the Layer Mask thumbnail of the Frame folder, and with your Plant Shadow layer still selected, add a new layer mask. So essentially what this has done is applied the same mask that we have to the Frame folder to the shadow. But the trick is that we're going to unlink the layer and the shadow, or the layer mask and the layer itself, I should say, and we're just going to select the layer on the left here, press V to get the Move tool, hold the Shift key and tap the down arrow maybe 4 or 5 times. Alright, and that's going to create a little bit of separation here between the shadow and the leaves. So now that we've done that, we can maybe drop the opacity a little bit to around 60 or 70%, just so we can see a little bit more of the frame there. And now we can relink those two layers. And the reason we did that is because we didn't want to move the mask, we just wanted to move the layer itself independently of the mask. Alright, so now select the layer mask, press B to switch back to the brush tool, and just come in here and clean up some of these shadows. Alright, so I'm just going over the areas outside of the frame here where I don't want that drop shadow to appear. Alright, because we only want to be left with the shadow that is inside of the frame. Alright, so now you guys can see if I turn that layer on and off, what that looks like, and there's just a couple of spots here that I need to clean up. Okay, but overall that's looking pretty nice, and it helps create and establish some depth here between the frame and the plants. Okay, so now once you've done that, come back up to the File menu and choose Open. And now we're going to come in here and select this image of the woman stretching, and then just choose Open. Now what we need to do here is again remove the background to separate our subject. So I'm just going to press W to get the magic wand tool and leave the tolerance set to around 34 and just begin sort of clicking and then hold the shift key and continue clicking to try and select as much of this background as you can. Now it should be fairly straightforward. There may be a couple of spots that we need to come in and correct or grab separately, but for the most part this should do a pretty good job. Now here you can see I've grabbed too much, so I'm just going to press Command Control Z to undo it and then come back and try it again. Alright, so that's a much better selection, but of course you can see there are still some little areas here that we need to get. So I'll press L on the keyboard to switch to the lasso, hold the shift key, and then just come in here and manually drag around all of those little dots just to add them to our selection. Okay, and you may need to zoom in a bit here as well. Come down here by the foot and the heel and do the same thing. Just try and get in there, get a manual selection that you want to add, okay, along with any other dots that we might have missed, and that looks pretty good. I'm going to use the hand tool to pan up here, press W to switch back to the wand, hold the shift key and click on this little area in here around the hair, press L to switch over to the lasso tool, and now instead of adding to the selection, this area on the chest I want to remove from the selection. So rather than holding the shift key, which gives us this little plus sign, I'm going to hold the Alt Option key, which gives us this minus sign. And now I can just come in here, select this area around the chest that we didn't want to grab, okay, and then I'm just going to close that shape, and it has now subtracted that from our selection. Okay, at this point I'll press Command Control 0 to fit this to the screen, press Command Control Shift and I on the keyboard to invert the selection, or you can come up to the select menu and choose Inverse. And now we're just going to click on the layer mask icon. Alright, so we've now removed the background. Okay, and if you want to, you can come in here. We do need to clean this up a little bit, but it's not too bad. You can either come in here, and just fill these selections with black, or you can paint it out manually. However you want to do it is fine. Now, once we've done that, let's go ahead and rename this layer. I'll just call it, woman or dancer or something like that. You can call it whatever you want. Maybe she's a yoga instructor. As long as you label it something clear, it's fine. Okay, and now hold the Control key, click on the layer, and choose Convert to Smart Object. And that's just going to make this layer here with our silhouette a smart object. And now we're going to hold the Command Control key, click on the layer, come up to the Select menu and choose Modify, Contract. We'll contract this by 1 pixel, press Enter or Return on the keyboard, and then we're going to apply another instance of a layer mask. And that's just going to help us sort of refine that selection a little bit. Now move this to the side, click and drag to drop this image into your main document, and then press Command Control and the tilde key to come back over here, and we can now close out of that image. Alright, so let's zoom out a little bit and sort of figure out the way we want to arrange and position the woman here in our image. Alright, so I'm going to place her here, maybe so she's overlapping the frame a little bit. You can move her up and just sort of play around with the size and positioning here until you get something that looks bit like this. Alright, and I think that's looking pretty good. That feels like a pretty good size and placement here for the image. So let's just go ahead and zoom in for a second here, because there are some edges again that we want to clean up. So select the layer mask here that's attached to that smart object layer, press B to switch over to the brush tool, and then just come in here and begin sort of brushing over some of these edges. that look a little bit rough. Okay, so I'm just going to brush out some of these thinner hairs by the forehead here. All right, just manually. I'm going to go in there, zoom in a little bit more if you need to. And we're also just going to clean up some of the area here over the shoulder. All right, so again, I'm just doing this kind of quick and rough with a mouse. But if you guys have a tablet, that's probably even a little bit better and easier. Okay, but if you go slow enough, it's not that hard to do with a mouse either. Of course, if you mess up, you can always go back. That's the beauty of working in Photoshop. All right, so I'm just going to clean up some of these rough edges here around the arms, just so we don't have any of these like white or light blue edges going around. All right, because we don't want it to look too messy. But these are the areas where you notice the most, where it's placed over, high contrast parts of the background. All right, so you kind of also notice it here, right along the stomach area, the rib cage. All right, so I'm just going to come in there, clean that up a bit more, try to make it look a little bit neater. Okay, and then just kind of use the spacebar to switch over to the hand and continue kind of just panning around the image a little bit so you can get any more of these sort of edges that just need a little bit of refinement. All right, and it shouldn't take too long, maybe just a couple of minutes, just to clean that up a bit more. Okay, and it's going to make a big difference. These kind of small details and attention to details really look better in the end result. Okay, so it is worth spending a little bit of time, especially with your selections anytime you're doing a silhouette and removing a subject from the background, just to make it look a little bit cleaner and neat. Right? So of course here, I messed up a little bit. Her forearm looks a little bit lumpy, so I'm just going to use white foreground color to brush that back in. All right, and all I'm doing is pressing X to toggle back and forth between my foreground and background color as I pan around with the hand tool. All right, and that's looking a lot better now. Now, with that Smart Object layer still selected, let's come up to the Image menu and choose Adjustments, Shadows, Highlights. So what we're going to do here is just bring out some of the detail, especially in the pants and the hair, any of the darker areas of the image that have a lot of shadows in them. And if I just check and uncheck that preview box, you can see what's happening there. All right, so it's a great little tip just to use, and all we're doing here is just working with this first group called shadows. So let's make sure the amount is set to 35, the tone set to 50, and the radius set to about 30. And now go ahead and press OK on the keyboard. Okay, from here, hold the Alt Option key, click on the adjustment layer icon, and add a black and white adjustment layer. Check off the box that says Use Previous Layer to create clipping mask, and then go ahead and click OK. Now, press the number 3 on the keyboard just to reduce the opacity to 30%. And you can see that we've now just desaturated that image a little bit. Alright, but I also want to apply another instance of this. So press Command-Control-J to duplicate that adjustment layer. And you'll see what happened here is that now that we've duplicated it, it actually doesn't have a clipping mask applied, so it's affecting the overall image. So to correct this, we simply need to press Command-Control and the left bracket to move that layer down one position, and then Command-Control and the right bracket to move it so that it's above the original black and white adjustment layer. Okay, but now it has the clipping mask applied, so it's only affecting the image of the woman stretching. Alright, so now we'll go ahead and drop the opacity down to 10% and change the blending mode from normal to overlay, and that's just going to add a nice bit of contrast there so that the image doesn't look too washed out. So now, let's go ahead and hold the Command-Control key and click on the layer mask of the Dancer Smart Object here. Add a new layer. Press D on the keyboard to reset your default colors, press X to make sure that white is the foreground color, and then press Alt-Option-Delete on the keyboard to fill the entire area with white. Now come up to the Select menu and choose Modify Contract, and we're going to contract this by about 10 pixels. Okay, and then just press Delete to get rid of everything else. Press Command-Control-D to deselect, change the blending mode from normal to overlay, and then come up to the Filter menu and choose Blur Gaussian Blur. Alright, so you should now have this sort of outline around the entire area, and we're just going to now blur this to soften it up a bit by about 7.6 pixels and press OK. And now we'll press Command-Control-J on the keyboard to duplicate and intensify that effect. Now select the top copy, hold the Shift key and select the copy below, press Command-Control-G to put them into a folder, and double-click on the Group 1 text and just call this Rim Light. Now add a layer mask to the Rim Light folder, press B on the keyboard to get your brush tool, and make sure that you have a solid black foreground color, which we do. And what we need to do now is make sure that we have a softer edged brush. So we're just going to hold the Shift key and tap the left bracket to soften that up a bit. And then all we're looking to do here is remove some parts of this glow. It's a really nice looking effect, but it is easy to overdo it. So let's just give it a little bit of love here. So all I'm going to do is brush out some of these areas that are facing down because our light source is coming from the top of the image, right? So we want to try to make that look as natural as possible by maintaining that light source for consistency. Okay, so you can just play around with the size of the brush a little bit, and we're looking to get rid of most of the light on the bottom parts of the arms, maybe the bottom and the front of the face, because it's a little intense there. Okay, and let's also get rid of some of it here on the front of the head as well as some of the areas on the legs. All right, just to dial it back a little bit. We don't want that light effect to appear everywhere. All right, even just to break some of these lines will be helpful. All right, and now you can see if I turn that layer on and off, that it looks like a bit more realistic and sparing use of that effect. Now select the rim light folder, hold the Shift key and select the Dancer Smart Object, then press Command-Control-G to put these into a group folder, and we'll just go ahead and call this folder Woman for right now. And then you can name that whatever you want, but I'm just going to go with that. And then what we're going to do is press Command-Control-J to duplicate that entire folder, and then Command-Control-E to merge it together. Hold the Command-Control key and click on the layer thumbnail icon. Press D to reset your default colors, and then once solid black is your foreground color, press Alt, Option, and Delete to fill that selection with solid black. Now we're going to press Command-Control-D to deselect it, and we're going to drag this layer down so that it's just above the frame folder. Okay, so now hold the Control key and click on the merged woman layer here, and then we're going to choose Create Clipping Mask so that we can clip it to the frame. Alright, now let's double click the name here, and we'll just rename this Shadow. Press V to get the Move tool, hold the Shift key, and just tap this down maybe 3 times, alright, to offset the shadow a little bit. Come back up to the Filter menu and choose Blur, Gaussian Blur once again, and we'll apply the same radius setting here of 7.5 pixels, and then press OK to apply the changes. Now press the number 6 just to drop the opacity down to about 60%, and we now have this nice shadow that should be appearing only within the boundaries of our frame. Alright, and you can see if you come back in here to the Woman folder, grab the Rim Light folder, or the Layer Mask, and I just want to come in here and get rid of some of this light around the hip area, just because it was looking a little bit funky with the shadow. So I'm just going to clean that up a little bit, and go ahead and collapse that folder. And again, we're now adding shadow here, just like we did with the plants, to establish some depth and separation between the elements in the foreground and the background. Alright, so now let's come back up to the File menu and choose Open once again, and we will now open our next stock photo. Alright, this time we're looking for the image called Close-Up Colors Design 940271, just this image of the rocks here on the gray background, and then choose Open. For this, what we're looking to do is isolate a few of these rocks. So we're going to zoom in a bit here using Command Control and the plus key, and then again holding down the space bar just to kind of click and drag around to navigate and pan around the image. And then we're going to press the letter P to switch to the pen tool. Now hopefully you guys are somewhat familiar with the pen tool. It is a very useful tool in Photoshop to know how to use. So all we're going to do here is use it to sort of trace around the shape of a few of these rocks. Alright, so all I'm doing is clicking and dragging to make a point, and as I drag before I release the mouse, you can see that I have control over the curve of the path here. And what I'm doing then is holding the Alt Option key to move these handles. Alright, so the direction and the length of these handles is going to affect my next point. So for example, if this is way over here and it's stretched out, I can't come over here and continue to trace the shape because it's basically stretched out. So instead what we're going to do is hold the Alt Option key to move that handle in and sort of in the same direction that we want to go. Alright, and now when I make my next point, it actually follows the shape. So that's what we want to do here, just to have more control over it. Alright, so again, I'm just going to click and drag, hold the Alt Option key to manipulate those handles, and sort of get it to face the direction that we want to go. All right, and then you can also adjust the length of it that way as well. And we're just looking to close the shape here. And then once you've done that, press Command, Control, and Return on the keyboard, and that's going to activate a selection around the path. Now from here, press Command, Control, J to duplicate and paste that layer onto a layer of its own. So you can see now we have that rock by itself. Hold the Control key and click on the layer and choose Convert to Smart Object for that one rock. And then let's just go ahead and double click on the layer name, and then we can rename this rock 1. Okay, now make sure to select the background layer, press P to return to the pen tool, and we're going to repeat this for a few more of these rocks. We're looking to get ideally 5 to 6 rocks here, just so that we can get a nice bit of variation. But the nice thing is that you get quite a few just from this one image, so we don't have to open several stock images and do this with a bunch of different rocks. We can kind of do it all just in this one image, which is nice and will save a little bit of time. Okay, but you guys will see why we're doing this in just a moment. What we're going to do is sort of place these around our image so that they kind of look like they're floating, just to add another level of visual interest here. All right, so again, make that selection by pressing Command, Control, and Return once you close the path, then Command, Control, J to paste it onto a new layer of its own. Hold the Control key, click on the layer, and convert it to a smart object, and then change the name to Rock 2. Okay, click on the background layer once again, press P to get back to the pen tool, and we're just going to continue this a few more times. You don't have to do this with every single rock. Maybe you can skip one or two of them and just pick out the ones that look the most interesting and will offer us a nice bit of variation. All right, so this one is pretty much just a circle, so that one should be pretty easy. All right, maybe there's a little bit of a bump there for variation. All right, and then we're just going to continue this process for a few more minutes until we get, again, about 5 or 6 of these rocks isolated and convert it into smart objects. All right, so maybe I'll grab this one, click and drag to create that nice curve there. Click, drag. All right, and it's sort of a, very easy kind of rinse and repeat. You kind of get in a rhythm here. And then once you understand the concept of manipulating these handles, it's even easier to get a good hold on. All right, so click here, drag that handle in, and then we're going to close the path, press Command, Control, and Return to make that selection. Then with the background layer selected, press Command, Control, J. All right, call this Rock 4, and then make it a smart object. And the reason we're making each of these rocks a smart object is that so once we get them into our file, we can basically resize them and manipulate them without any loss in quality of the original image. If we didn't make them smart objects first and we just tried to do that with a regular raster-based image, we could resize it maybe once or twice, but then we would start to notice a loss in the quality of the image. It would become sort of blurred and pixelated, which we don't want. Okay. Rock 5. And then I'm just going to grab that one last rock on the end here. All right. And just trace that pretty quickly. All right, but hopefully you guys get the idea. You can kind of get a sense of how the pen tool works. It's great for tracing images like this, geometric shapes and things like that. And you can see that it works pretty well and pretty quickly. Okay, so you should now have 6 rocks. So select the bottom one, hold the Shift key, and select the top one. So you've got all 6 rocks selected. Move the window to the side, press V to get your Move tool, then click, hold the Shift key, and drop these all into your main document. Press Command, Control, and the tilde key to come back over here, and then Command, Control, W to close that window because we no longer need it. Now, with all of your rocks still selected in the main document, press Command, Control, G on the keyboard to put them into a folder, and double-click the Group 1 text and rename this folder Rocks with an S. Okay, and then we're just going to expand that folder and turn off the visibility of all of the rocks except for the first one. All right, now we'll press Command Control T to do a free transform, and then Command Control 0 to zoom out so that we can see where this first rock is. Now, again, pressing Command Control T to do a free transform, we can now begin to rotate and position these rocks throughout the image however we like. So this first one, maybe I'll place a bit down here, rotate it a bit downwards, all right, and then turn on the next one, press Command Control T to do a free transform, and continue this process just so that we can, sort of create a little bit of variety here as we scatter these rocks around the image. All right, and again, this is helping to sell some of the depth in the image here just by adding another layer. All right, and you can see that it quickly sort of helps to just vary the size and the positioning of all of these separate rocks here. So maybe that one can be pretty small, just sort of floating off to the side. Go for the next one. All right, make it smaller. Maybe position this one over the arm or part of the plants. It's okay if it, overlaps something. All right, like this one can be coming in front, over the arm a bit, or maybe a bit smaller. All right, somewhere about there. Just play around with it, spend a few minutes just kind of looking and deciding what you think looks best. There's no real right or wrong way to do this part. Okay, and then rock 5. Maybe this one can be placed in the upper corner here, nice and big. All right, just off to the side there. Grab rock 6 and do the same thing. All right, grab another small one that we can maybe put somewhere over here. And maybe let's move it up a bit. All right, somewhere about there looks okay. And if you want, you can always grab some of these rocks, press Command Control J to duplicate them, and just add another copy of it somewhere else. Just be sure to change the size and rotation and positioning enough so that it doesn't just look like an exact copy of one of the other rocks. All right, and then we can just add a few more to make it look sort of random and scattered. Right, and I think that's looking pretty good. So at this point, we've got about 6 or 7 different rocks in the image here. So what I want to do is select some of the larger ones that are cropped, such as rock 1 and rock 5, and we're going to come up to the filter menu and choose Blur, Gaussian Blur, and blur these by about 12 pixels. All right, do the same here, rock 1, filter, blur, Gaussian Blur, 12 pixels. And that's just going to create a little bit of a depth of field there. All right, so it's going to make it look as though these are very close to the viewer or the camera that we're sort of setting up in our scene here. All right, and then once you've done that, we can just go ahead and collapse that entire folder. And you can now see that that is helping to sell the idea and add more depth to the design, which is exactly what we want. So now let's select that rocks folder, press Command Control J to duplicate the entire folder, and then press Command Control E to merge it together. Hold the Command Control key, click on the layer thumbnail icon, and then press Alt Option Delete to fill that selection with solid black. Press Command Control D to deselect, change the blend mode from normal to overlay, and then maybe let's reduce the opacity a bit to about 30 or 40%. All right, that's just going to add a bit of contrast and make those a little bit darker. All right, and that looks pretty good. And now let's duplicate this layer by pressing Command Control J, and then we'll use the keyboard shortcut Command Control and the left bracket to move this down below the original rocks folder. And then we're going to change the blending mode back to normal. Press 5 or 6 to bring the opacity back up to 50 or 60%. And now we're going to hold the Shift key and tap this down maybe 4 or 5 times just to offset the shadow. Then come back up to the filter menu and choose Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we'll blend this one, or blur this one by about 7.5 pixels like we did earlier. Alright, so now we have some nice shadows here being cast from the rocks. So at this point we can double click this layer, we'll just call it Rock Shadows, hold the Shift key and select the top rocks overlay layer, and then press Command Control G to put them into a folder. Double click this group and just name it Rocks or something similar once again. Now create a new layer at the top, press the letter G on the keyboard to switch to the gradient tool. Make sure that you have a solid black foreground color still selected, and we want a gradient that fades from black to transparent, which we have. And then all we're going to do on our new layer is click somewhere below the image here. Click, hold the shift key, and drag upwards to create this nice dark fade at the bottom. And then press the number 8 to reduce the opacity slightly to about 80%. And then let's just rename this layer bottom fade. Alright, so this is going to help to fade out the image a little bit on the bottom so that we can later on place a little bit of text down here that'll be nice and easy to read. Next, create a new layer. Press T on the keyboard to get your type tool, and then press the letter X to toggle so that you now have a solid white foreground color. And now we're just going to click our cursor somewhere in the image here and type out the word wellness in upper and lowercase. Now for this, I want to select all of the text either by clicking and dragging or pressing Command-Control-A. Come up to the window menu and choose Character to open the character panel. And for this, we're going to change the typeface to a free font called Ohio. Now this is a free font that I've shown the link for in the written portion of the tutorial. It is a free typeface that you guys will need to download from dafont.com. And once you've done that, it should be very easy to just come in here and set this up. Alright, so change it to Ohio, and then using the character panel, we're going to make the size around 114 point and change the tracking setting here to maybe -30 or 32. And you can leave the color here set to solid white. Alright, so here what I'm looking to do is just make this upper and lowercase. You can see I accidentally have this small caps option checked off, so let me uncheck that just to return it to the regular lowercase letters. Alright, and then what we're going to do is sort of position this over the center of the image. Maybe move it down a little bit. Okay, somewhere about here. Looks pretty good. And then I'll just zoom in a little bit, move my character panel to the side, and take a look at what we have so far. So what I'm looking to do now is add a layer mask to the text layer, and then we're going to expand the contents of the woman folder here that has the woman stretching. And with that layer mask still selected, hold the Command-Control key and click on the layer mask thumbnail of the mask down here. Alright, so it's going to activate a selection around the woman stretching here while we still have our text layer mask selected. So switch to the brush tool by pressing B on the keyboard. Make sure that you have 100% solid black brush, and then we're just going to brush in here over the woman's arms and any of the areas where we want to hide these letters and make it look like it's going behind the woman here. So I'm going to brush out the first L and maybe just the top of the letter N here, just so we get a little bit of overlap here from the letters. Now once you've done that, press Command-Control-D to deselect all, and you can see that we're starting to establish a little bit of depth here with the text as well. But one thing you may notice about this font that is a little bit strange is that in some places there's this bit of a knockout where the shapes intersect. So we're going to need to come in here and just kind of fix that ourselves. So let's go ahead and create a new layer. Press B to switch back to the brush tool, and make sure that you now have a solid white color selected so that it matches the color of the text. Set the opacity to 100%, and then just change the hardness of the brush by holding the shift and the right bracket key. And then use the left bracket just to make it a bit smaller. And we're just going to come in here and try to carefully fill in any of these gaps that we see between the letters here. Now I'm not sure why it does this, but it's just something that you want to look out for. And if you do experience this same issue, at least you guys will know how to correct it. Alright. And so we're just filling in some of those spots there. Now press Command-Control-0 to fit this to the screen here, and double click that layer to rename it letter fix. Okay, and then select that layer, hold the shift key and select the main wellness text layer below, and press Command-Control-G to put it in a folder. Double click the group 1 text and just rename this folder wellness. Now one other thing that's bothering me a little bit here is the fact that we kind of have this rock that's sort of inconveniently placed now over the arm, and it's just bugging me a little bit. So what I want to do is figure out which rock that is and just get rid of it or move it somewhere else. Alright, so I'm just going to turn that layer off, select the overlay layer above it, add a mask, and and then use a solid black brush just to brush over that area and hide it. Now let's not forget we also have to do that with the rock shadows, so add a layer mask and just paint out that shadow that was being cast from that rock. Alright, so that looks better. Okay, and then we can come in here and if you see any areas that we missed, just brush over them like so. Now what we're going to do next is once again expand the contents of the folder here of the woman stretching. Hold the Command Control key and click on the thumbnail again. Come back to the top folder here, the wellness folder. Add a new layer. Press D to reset your default colors, and with black set as your foreground, press Alt Option Delete, and then Command Control D to deselect. Now I'm going to hold the Shift key and tap this down 3 or 4 times, and then hold the Control key, click on the layer, and choose Create Clipping Mask. Alright, so we've now clipped this to the wellness text folder. Alright, we can just rename this layer Shadow because it's going to be another shadow layer. Come up to the filter menu, choose Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we'll blur this by about 5 pixels, and then press OK to apply the changes. Now press the number 6 to reduce the opacity to about 60%, and now we're going to add a layer mask to this layer. Press B to get our brush tool, and what we're going to do now is just sort of brush over the parts where we want to get rid of this shadow. Alright, so any of the parts of the letters that are coming in front of the dancer or the instructor, the woman stretching, are the parts that we want to hide. Okay, so we should only be left with shadows in these areas here where the woman's body is overlapping the letters. So again on the N, the first L, and the W. Alright, and you can see what I mean there when I turn the layer on and off. Now open the Wellness group folder here, hold the Command key and the Shift key, and click on the thumbnail icon for the text layer as well as the letter fix layer so we get all of those layers selected as well. And what we're going to do from there is select the bottom fade layer here, add a new layer above it so that it's below both of our text layers, and once again fill it with solid black. Okay, then press Command Control D on the keyboard to deselect all, and we're going to reduce the opacity to maybe about 60%. Double click the layer to call it something like text shadow, and then let's hold the Shift key and tap this down maybe about 3 times. Come back up to the filter menu, and now we can just choose Gaussian blur again to blur it by the same amount. And what we want to do now is make this shadow appear just below the text and really nowhere else. Okay, so what we can do is open the folder here of the woman again, hold the Command Control key, click on that layer mask thumbnail, and now we need to inverse the selection, so come up to Select and choose Inverse, and then go ahead and add a layer mask. So we now have a shadow being cast from our text that we can see here over the frame and the background. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. You guys can see what we're trying to do here. And you can also sort of experiment with the opacity. Maybe you want it at 50% instead, just to make it look a little bit softer. Alright, but when I zoom out, you can see that's looking pretty nice. So let's now go ahead and collapse a few of these folders here, just so we can get a sense of where everything is and how we're doing so far. Now I'm going to create a new layer at the top here, press T to get my type tool, and then press X so that I have a solid white foreground color. And I'm going to try to click my cursor here, but it's making me select that wellness type, which I don't want. So let's go ahead and click our cursor somewhere else and then just move the type afterwards. Now using the character panel here, I'm going to change this font to Helvetica New, but you guys can feel free to use any kind of sans serif bold condensed typeface. Helvetica is just sort of a quick and easy one that everybody seems to have, and we're going to go with the condensed bold style. Now for this I'm going to go ahead and change the size of my text to around 21.14 point. You don't have to be exact there, and then the tracking can be set to about 508. Now we're going to use the same solid white fill color. Uncheck this small caps option and just make it regular caps, which is these two uppercase T's next to each other. Alright, now I'm going to move this layer below the wellness layer. Click inside and change this to say in the wild. Alright, so we've now got wellness in the wild set up here as our title. Alright, and I'm just going to sort of eyeball it and try to center it a little bit, positioning it over a bit of the plants below our main text. Now, with that text layer selected, press the number 5 to reduce the opacity to 50%, add a layer mask, come into the Plants folder, hold the Command-Control key, and click on the Plants Smart Object here to activate a selection around it. Then come back up, select the layer mask that's attached to the In the Wild type layer, zoom in, press B to get your brush tool, and make sure you have a solid black color selected. And then we're just going to begin to brush over some of these letters here that we want to hide, just to add a little bit of overlap there. So maybe over the letter D, the I, the W, anywhere else that seems interesting. I think in this case we don't want to hide too much of the letter N, so I'm just going to leave that alone. Press D to deselect it, and then 0 to return the opacity back to 100%. Okay, so now what we're going to do is hold the Command-Control key, click on the thumbnail icon of that text layer, create a new layer, press X so that you have a solid black foreground color, and then press Alt-Option-Delete to fill that layer with solid black. Press Command-Control-D to deselect it, and then Command-Control and the left bracket to move that layer down one position so that it's behind the text. Now press Shift and the down key maybe 2 times. Come up to the filter menu and choose Blur, Gaussian Blur. Let's blur it by about 5 pixels and then reduce the opacity to about 60% just so we have a nice diffused shadow there. Okay, now what we're going to do is hold the Command-Control key and click on the layer mask thumbnail icon of the In the Wild text layer to activate a selection around it, and then go ahead and add a new layer mask. Alright, so that's going to make it so that the shadow only appears behind the plants. Alright, so you can see what we're going for here, where we have a nice bit of shadow falling behind the subtext. But if we need to modify it at all, again, just unlink the mask and the layer itself, select the layer, and then you can just manually kind of tap it up independently of the mask so we don't mess anything up there. And then just remember to relink those layers and go ahead and call this shadow, just so we know what we're looking at. Alright, now I'm going to come back up here, add another new layer, use the hand tool to kind of pan down to the bottom of the screen, press T to get my type tool, X to toggle back and forth between my foreground and background colors so that I have a solid white foreground color selected. And now I'm going to click here with my cursor, and let's go ahead and type out well-being and fitness courses in beautiful country locations. Now obviously we can't see everything, we need to press Command-Control-A to select this entire line, and then just bring the size way down, maybe to about 5.65. Alright, and then let's also go ahead and change the tracking to about 188. Okay, make sure that everything is uppercase and not small caps like before. And then we're just going to position this in the center of the image, somewhere down here below the frame. Okay, and now what we want to do is click on that color swatch so that we can change the fill color of this layer to 9FA, 98F. Alright, so it's this sort of pale green color here. Alright, and then what we're going to do is press Command-Control-J to duplicate that layer, Command-Control in the left bracket to move it down, hold the Shift key and tap it down a few times, click once again on the color swatch, and now let's change the fill color here to A7C4BD, which is instead sort of a pale blue. Press T to get the type tool, click inside a few times to highlight the entire line of text, and now let's type out visit www.wellnessinthewild.com for more information. And then just go ahead and click on the move tool there. Maybe move these a little bit closer together. So we now have these two lines at the bottom of our design. And again, that's why we added this bottom fade earlier, because you can see that it really helps with the legibility, the readability of that text on the bottom. So what I'm looking to do now is select that very top text layer, hold the Shift key, and select the shadow layer just below the In the Wild text. We also need to grab these two, so hold the Command-Control key and also select all of these down here just to the text shadow layer above the bottom fade. Alright, so you now have all these text layers selected. Press Command-Control-G to put them into a group folder and rename this folder text. Alright, now what we're going to do is come down here to the adjustment layer icon and add a solid color adjustment layer to the very top of our image. And let's go ahead and change the hex value to A8E8F1 and then click OK. Press the number 2 to reduce the opacity to 20%. and then change the blend mode to color burn. Alright, so this now adds this nice sort of rich blue tint to the overall image and just gives it a bit more of that cool vibe that we're going for. Alright, so at this point our artwork for the flyer is pretty much done, so let's go ahead and save this file. Alright, and then once we have this saved, what we're going to do is come up here to this hamburger menu in the upper right corner, click and come all the way down to where it says flatten image, click OK, and now we've merged everything into one single layer. So we don't want to save over our layered file, so come up to the file menu and choose save as. Alright, and we're just going to save this in the same location, maybe just add the word flattened to the end of it, just so we can always go back to our layered artwork later on if we want to. Alright, and what we're going to do now is come up to the file menu and choose open, and let's navigate to our mockup. Alright, so again, this mockup, just like the stock photos, the font, are all linked in the written portion of the tutorial. And once you download this mockup, we're only going to be working with mockup 1. Alright, I think there's 5 or 6 mockups that come in this download, but we're only going to be using this first one. Alright, so let's go ahead and open this up in Photoshop really quick. And all we're going to do here is delete this top watermark layer. Alright, we don't need that. And let's come into the BG folder and double click on this adjustment layer here, the BG color. Alright, so we can change the background color to the hex value 28454C, alright, which is this nice sort of grayish blue color taken directly from our flyer. And the next thing we're going to do is come into this smart object layer that says sheet 2 edit me. Alright, and let's change our foreground color here to the hex value 182629, and then press Alt Option Delete to fill that entire layer with our color. Press Command Control S to save it, and then Command Control W to close this tab once it is finished saving. Alright, and what that's going to do is update the smart object so that you can see the flyer in the background now is just filled with that solid color. And now come into the Sheet 1 smart object, take the flattened artwork that we have here, click and then hold the Command Control and Shift key and drop it into this smart object window. Now you'll need to scale it up just a touch from the center by holding the Alt Option and Shift keys just to make sure that the entire canvas is filled. Alright, and once you've done that, you can press Command Control S to once again save this smart object, and once it's done, return to the main mockup file. Alright, so there you have it, guys. You can see that we now have our Wellness in the Wild flyer design that we created, and we've dropped it into this pretty cool looking flyer design mockup, which is totally free. Alright, so to create our flyer today, we've used a handful of free elements as well as some elements from the all-new Creators Inspiring Artistic collection with packs from artists like the Artifix Forge, Everdrifter, Set Stale Studios, and more. This collection is full of inspiring resources to ensure you're all fired up for your current and upcoming design projects. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed this tutorial. I know we covered a lot today. It was a little bit tricky in some parts, but hopefully everything made sense to you guys. And we would love to see how you guys apply these techniques and tricks to your own work. So please go ahead and share that with us. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. My name is Eric Vasquez here with Design Cuts, and we'll see you next time.